today I'd like to talk about the thing that binds these two watches together. On the left we have a Rolex Explorer 2. It's from the early 2000s, and as you can see on the dial, it's labeled Superlative Chronometer Officially Certified. What that means is that Rolex sent this movement in large batches out to a company that they paid, currently known as COSC. That organization tested the movement, and if they found it reached a certain timekeeping criteria, the Rolex would then be allowed to legally call it an officially certified chronometer on the dial and attach a certificate of timekeeping and label it as such, which is what you have. The thing is, this is sort of limited to Swiss watches. And then the question is, how do you have a King Seiko from 1969 that also has, in this case, superior chronometer officially certified? Just so you know, superlative and superior in both of those cases means that the timekeeping accuracy is higher than that of a normal officially certified chronometer. But the point is, the main point is, how on earth did you get a Japanese watch from 1969 to have that same labeling? Now, before I go any further, I'll just do some basic definitions. Now, chronometer just means highly accurate clock or timekeeper. Before that, before we got to officially certified chronometers, we had a marine chronometer. A marine chronometer was used for navigating the seas from the 1700s onward, and it was an incredibly accurate clock that had a accuracy of about, I think, 0.1 second a day. And it was used for navigation in the seas for the longest time, and it was an essential part of exploration and trade in the world. But the thing is, nowadays large ships don't use marine chronometers. What they use is typically GPS navigation, so it's sort of an antiquated concept now. And then we go on to the officially certified chronometer. And there's not that much information available, but basically the rough history of the officially certified chronometer is that the Swiss started opening up these so-called Bureau of Observations, typically attached to watchmaking schools in the late 1800s. And as the decades progressed into the 1900s, they kept opening up new Bureau of Observations in different cantons of Switzerland. And originally the goal was something along the lines of, this will help consumers tell apart quality from junk. And basically they evaluated movements. And the thing is, as the new centers opened up throughout Switzerland, they were all independent. So they had their own fees for evaluating movements. And in essence, I guess to some extent, they weren't standardized and there was competition between them. Somewhere in the between the 50s and the 60s, they decided to come under an umbrella organization called the ABDO. And their goal was to protect the definition of the word chronometer and to sort of standardize fees. I believe in the 50s was around the time where Rolex started labeling their watches as officially certified chronometers. What I believe based on what I've researched, again, if I make any mistakes, I'm happy to be corrected. But that's where we started sort of getting the ball rolling with the officially certified chronometer designation. And so now we're in the 50s. By the time we reach the 60s, Seiko has really started taking mechanical watch accuracy seriously. They released the Grand Seiko line and the King Seiko line, and in both cases they had watches that were labeled chronometer. Not, mind you, officially certified chronometer, but chronometer. An example is like this 44 King Seiko. Now this is a non-chronometer labeled, but they also had a version that looked most just like this, except it said chronometer on right under the Seiko. Eventually the Swiss ABDO organization caught wind of it and took issue. And apparently, as the story goes, legal action was taken because apparently they were very protective of their chronometer designation. And it ended up with there being a Japanese branch of the Swiss Bureau of Observation that opened up. And that allowed Japanese watches to be evaluated as officially certified chronometers, which is why in the late 60s you started seeing Japanese watches, both Seiko and Citizen, labeled as such. Now, this went on through the 70s and into the early 80s. Now, you have to understand, though, what was happening by the late 60s to the early 70s. Seiko released their Astron in around 69, and that had an accuracy of about 5 seconds a month. Now, that demolished the accuracy standards for certified chronometers, and to be frank, ultimately, it probably it was even better than marine chronometer standard. So the significance of an officially certified mechanical chronometer really started to lessen in the 70s, going into the late 70s and then into the 80s. And in the 70s, Seiko started releasing watches like these. This is a Grand Quartz 4842, which has an accuracy of about 10 seconds a month. And prior to that, whoops, we had the fancy, very fine adjusted 39 series quartz, which also had an accuracy of about 10 seconds a month. And when you have an accuracy of about 10 seconds a month, it really makes the accuracy of these mechanical chronometers almost irrelevant. Now, if you're going to wax poetic about the beauty of mechanical things and things like that, maybe it has more value. But if you try to imagine what it was like to live in the 70s, where this newfangled technology comes along that's just so much more accurate, it really changed the game. And the reality is it really lessened the significance of things. So not surprisingly, by the early 80s, the Japanese branch of the certification office closed down. And even for the Swiss organization itself, which renamed itself KOSK in around 73, they actually had a lot of inner turmoil going on in there, because apparently there were fewer watches being certified, and it led to a lot of the employees up into the late 70s, early 80s were actually unemployed, and there were a lot of concerns about how the industry was going to be kept alive. Now, obviously, the mechanical renaissance in the 90s changed things, but going into the 80s, it really was a dicey time, based on my research, for the Swiss and their Bureau of Observation, or modern times, KOSK organization. But anyway, sorry for the bit of a drawn-out story, but that is the tie that binds these two watches, and that's, again, what would explain why you can run into Seiko Citizen watches from the 70s that are going to be labeled as chronometer, officially certified, and why you're mostly not going to see that anymore. There are actually some, I believe, Creedors that were labeled as chronometers in the 90s, but again, that's a teeny tiny little percentage. Almost anything else you see that's officially certified chronometer is going to be Swiss. And of course, now a lot of the high-end Swiss companies have set up their own internal testing standards, so there's that little battle going on. But I thought it would be a really interesting thing that's not really been well documented, an explanation of why you have Japanese officially certified chronometer watches. And that's about it for this video, and as usual, thanks for watching.